When astronomers first tried to determine the chemical composition of 3I Atlas, many expected to see a structure characteristic of ordinary comets, a mixture of ice, dust, and volatiles that form on the outskirts of young stellar systems. But the actual spectral data raised far more questions than answers. The fact is that the analysis showed the presence of components that are rarely found in objects of the solar system. Some measurements recorded an extremely low content of water ice, while others, an unexpectedly high level of certain organic compounds that usually form only under very specific conditions. The interpretation of this was fairly cautious. Researchers suggested that 3I Atlas might have formed in an unusual zone of another stellar system, perhaps closer to the central star than typical cometary nuclei, or in an environment where the conditions were drastically different from those in our protoplanetary disk. But it was after this that assumptions began to appear that no one officially commented on. Claims began to spread online that the initial spectral images supposedly showed signs of microstructures resembling polymer chains. There is no direct confirmation of this, but several amateur astronomers claimed they saw this data before it was adjusted in the new versions of the catalog. Access to certain files was indeed blocked for a short time, officially explained as technical issues. But why this happened on the same day the initial chemical models were published remains unclear. Some researchers believe that very primitive structured elements of organic origin, formed millions of years ago, might have existed on 3I Atlas. This does not mean life, and no serious scientists claim such a thing, but the appearance of organic chains on an interstellar object looks unusual, especially considering that the conditions of interstellar space are capable of destroying most organic molecules in a relatively short time. There is a thought that such structures could be remnants of the ancient environment in which the object formed. Perhaps 3I Atlas was born in a system where the chemical composition differed significantly from ours. But another, more controversial version is spreading online. Some believe the comet might have passed through a region of space with an unusual type of radiation or energetic flows that contributed to the preservation of unstable molecules. At the same time, according to employees of one of the observatories, unusually high electromagnetic background around the object was recorded during early observations. Officially, it was attributed to background instrument noise, but astronomers who worked with the telemetry noticed that the fluctuations were too regular, as if 3I Atlas was passing through a zone influenced by some external factors. Several technicians even anonymously confirmed that they saw something strange in the unprocessed signals, although they kept the details off the record. There is another real fact. The analysis of dust evaporating from the comet's surface showed the presence of isotopes that are rarely found in materials of the solar system. They could indicate formation under conditions of intense cosmic radiation or in a region where a supernova passed nearby. This interpretation leads to the idea that 3I Atlas might have been part of a deep inner layer of some larger body that was torn apart by a powerful explosion. The conspiratorial version claims that this explosion might not have been natural. Some enthusiasts speculate about the possibility of unknown astrophysical mechanisms, not necessarily artificial, but not described by modern models. For example, the influence of dense objects that create ultra-strong particle flows and can alter the chemical structure of fragments. The most interesting thing is that in satellite images taken almost simultaneously with the moment of maximum comet activity, a dark zone appeared near its orbit. It shifted synchronously with the trajectory of 3I Atlas. A few hours later, these images were replaced with new ones, without the dark spot. Everything was explained as an optical defect, but those who managed to see the original photos claim that the spot had clear boundaries, which is rare for digital glitches. Some experts insist that the comet, despite all its peculiarities, is a completely natural object. An unusual composition? Yes, but interstellar space is full of chemical processes that we still do not fully understand. Others point to the combination of anomalies, strange organic structures, the accidental disappearance of data, dark zones in images, anomalous electromagnetic background, and ask the question, could 3I Atlas be hiding something that does not fit into the classical picture of comet formation? Was it just an icy fragment of another stellar system? Or perhaps a carrier of materials that should not have survived in open space? There are many versions, and none of them has been disproven yet. As researchers began to take a closer look at 3I Atlas, it quickly became clear. This object was unlike any other interstellar traveler. The first spectroscopic analyses showed the expected icy components, water, CO2, CO, and traces of complex organic molecules. It would seem nothing unusual for a comet that came from afar. But even at this stage, nuances appeared that did not align with models of interstellar ice evolution. The fact remained. The molecular ratios of some components differed from the expected ones by at least several times. The interpretation was cautious. Perhaps 3I Atlas formed in a region of the galaxy with different chemical evolution, for example, in a colder and less metal-rich part of the interstellar medium. But then something began that sparked the first conspiratorial speculations. Some researchers noticed faint teeth in the spectra, peak signals that usually indicate the influence of high temperatures. For an interstellar comet, this is nearly impossible. Such objects drift for millions of years in cold that is practically indistinguishable from absolute zero. An assumption appeared online. Could the object have been subjected to thermal processing after its formation? It is entirely possible that it passed near a massive star or even was deliberately heated by an unknown source. According to certain indirect data, part of these spectral peaks disappeared from the database a day after publication. There is no official explanation for this. Scientists only quietly joked that it was a technical glitch. But why exactly these sets of signals? And why from several observatories in different countries? No one says. Another detail that drew attention was the unusually high concentration of complex organic compounds. The reality is, interstellar comets do contain organics, but 3I Atlas showed almost twice the values. The traditional interpretation, perhaps in the part of the galaxy it came from, the processes of organic synthesis were more active. But some astrochemists pointed out something else. The organic layer, as if deposited, had a structure resembling concentric rings. This already raised questions. Several anonymous employees of a European observatory wrote in private chats that there was something too regular in the distribution of organics. The data is now hard to find. The archive links no longer open. Possibly a coincidence. Or possibly an attempt to hide information that might spark unwanted discussion. There is a view that such regularity could arise only under conditions of controlled heating and cooling processes. As if the comet was not simply born in a chaotic mixture of dust and ice, but went through some form of shaping or reprocessing. There is no direct evidence, but the very fact of the regular structure remains. Another parameter turned out to be even stranger, the ratio of hydrogen and oxygen isotopes. The recorded fact. It does not match any previously studied comet in our system. This hinted at an exotic origin. Interpretation. 3I Atlas could have formed in particularly old or massive stellar regions. But the conspiratorial layer arose here on its own. Some researchers suggested that the isotope ratios seemed leveled. They were too precise, without the natural fluctuations typically produced during formation. The online narrative claims that such a result could be the effect of an ultra-powerful energy source, for example, a device capable of evaporating and recondensing ice. Sounds fantastic, but there are no official disprovals either. The internal thermal regime of the comet also turned out to be strange. Telescopes recorded local hotspots that appeared and disappeared within a few hours. The fact was documented independently by several instruments. The interpretation: gas outbursts exposing darker areas. But according to certain indirect evidence, some of the thermal zones had clean, almost circular geometry. Such shapes are atypical for natural sublimation processes. Several researchers in private conversations suggested that these hot spots might be remnants of microscopic structures capable of storing heat. Nothing alien or technological, but the concept already opens space for interpretations, especially considering that the data from one of the thermal cameras was never published. They cited a calibration error. One mysterious incident is also worth mentioning. On the night when high-precision spectral measurements were planned, an anomalous electromagnetic field was recorded over the observatory. This is officially confirmed, but the explanation was purely technical: local interfering radiation. However, the source of this interference was not specified. And most importantly, on that exact night, part of the data was lost. Satellite images of the region showed a dark zone that was quickly replaced with new photos. No comments were given. And this is when many began saying that such coincidences were happening a bit too synchronously with key observational moments of 3I Atlas. What these anomalies truly mean is difficult to say. It could be a simple chain of coincidences, or the result of the object's interstellar origin, or something more complex. There are many versions, and none has been disproven yet. Everything may turn out to be simpler, or far more intricate. After the first spectral analyses, scientists attempted to reconstruct the internal structure of 3I Atlas using a combination of thermal models, brightness data, and changes in chemical composition. What became known surprised even experienced researchers of interstellar objects. The real fact was simple. The comet had an atypical porosity and much denser inner layers. It turned out that the outer ice was loose, almost crumbly, while beneath it lay a layer of anomalously compact matter, as if compressed under enormous pressure. The basic interpretation of this finding: the comet may have survived a close encounter with a massive star or shock compression in a dense molecular cloud. But some researchers noted that the boundary between the layers was too sharp, almost like in artificially formed materials. In natural comets, layering is usually smoother and more chaotic. This led to the assumption perhaps 3I Atlas had once undergone not a typical cosmic event, but controlled influence. Comments about mysterious cold cavities began to spread online, regions inside the comet that, according to thermal models, had temperatures several tens of degrees lower than the surrounding material. Fact, such temperature dips were indeed recorded, although at first they were dismissed as errors. Interpretation: cavities filled with ultra-cold gas. And the conspiratorial version suggested something else. Some experts believe that such localized temperature anomalies can form only if internal structures were affected, as if unknown cooling or energy-draining processes once operated there. Why exactly these radar-sounding data disappeared from open access is unknown. Files that were available for download in the evening already showed a document missing, error by morning. No official source comments on this. Even stranger was the phenomenon informally called crosscracks. It was a network of lines in the inner layers of the comet, forming an almost geometric pattern. Fact: models did indeed show structural irregularities. But under normal conditions, cracks in comets are chaotic, created during heating and cooling cycles. Here, however, several lines intersected at angles, repeating with accuracy to a degree. Some researchers believe this could be a sign of former internal activity that tore the material from within. Others spoke even more cautiously. The structure resembles certain technical stress patterns in materials subjected to regular loads. Parallel to this, another mystery existed. During one infrared observation, the comet exhibited a short thermal burst that lasted only 11 seconds. The fact was recorded. This was disclosed in an Internal Institute report. interpretation, a volatile gas outburst. But according to certain indirect data, the gas outburst model did not explain such rapid temperature increase. There's a view that the burst might have been caused by the rupture of an internal capsule with trapped gas. But why such a capsule existed is the question. Several observatory employees anonymously confirmed. Immediately after this thermal incident, representatives of a certain state agency arrived, although supposedly nothing serious happened. Why they needed to intervene in a routine analysis of cometary activity, no one explained. In satellite images taken the same day, a dark zone appeared around the observatory, as if a fragment of the image had been replaced. Footage from surveillance cameras was also not published, citing poor quality recording. There are more mysteries in the structure of 3I Atlas than answers. And although everything is officially explained by natural processes, many details remain unclear. Whether they are simply coincidences is for you to decide. But whatever was happening inside this comet, its history is clearly more complex than it appears at first glance. During the spectral analysis of 3I Atlas, astronomers obtained data that at first glance seemed ordinary. Combinations of water ice, carbon, nitrogen, small amounts of ammonia, and organic molecules. This is a typical set for comets traveling between stellar systems. But when they began comparing individual spectral lines, it became clear that the composition contained details that did not fit standard cosmochemical models. A real fact. 3I/Atlas was found to contain an elevated amount of complex organic molecules, including some polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons and rare isotopic ratios. Under normal circumstances, such molecules form in protostellar clouds or in the outer regions of planetary systems, but their concentration on an object of this type was unusually high. The astronomer's interpretation is simple. The comet may have formed in an environment richer in organics than ours. But at the same time, this concentration raised suspicions. Some researchers believe that the anomalous isotopic ratios may indicate that the comet passed through an area with an increased radiation level, for example, near a nova or supernova. Everything seems logical, but this raised the question. Why do other elements not show similar signs of exposure? Online speculation suggests that 3I Atlas may have been part of a body that was once subjected to controlled irradiation, possibly for sterilization or research. Official experts refuse to comment on such versions. An even more interesting detail is the content of halogens, particularly chlorine and fluorine. Fact. Their concentrations turned out to be higher than on any known comet. This can be explained by the object having formed in a system with a different chemical balance. But some chemists noted that such ratios resemble the results of laboratory experiments on synthesizing durable organic polymers. This is not proof, but the similarity is so strange that it cannot be ignored. A separate layer of mysteries was created by data in the ultraviolet range. One of the telescopes recorded faint lines that are usually associated with molecules that quickly break down under sunlight. But in the spectrum of 3I Atlas, these lines persisted for several days in a row, which is nearly impossible with natural evaporation. There is an opinion that these molecules may have been hidden inside the comet and released suddenly, exactly at the moment when it passed a certain point in its trajectory. The most controversial results were obtained from high-precision spectroscopy conducted at a European ground-based observatory. Based on certain indirect data, molecules were detected in the composition that some scientists interpreted as amino acid precursors. The report even mentioned the possibility that 3I Atlas contained fragments of more complex chemical chains. However, the next day, this part of the document disappeared from open access. Instead, a revised version appeared, stripped of any mention of organic structures. Several employees of a laboratory where the analysis was conducted stated anonymously that they had seen the raw data and that part of the spectra indeed had non-standard peaks. But they were forbidden from disclosing information until the completion of internal discussions. What exactly that means, no one explained. In satellite images of the region taken during the active observation phase, a strange dark area appeared, which was later replaced with other materials. Whether this was a technical malfunction or part of the image was hidden for other reasons. No official source comments. The composition of 3I Atlas has raised more questions than answers. Whether this chemistry was simply a product of another stellar system or a hint at something far more complex is up to the viewer to decide. There are many theories and none disproved. Everything may turn out to be a simple organic phenomenon or a fragment of a story that began far beyond the limits of our understanding. The behavior of gas emissions from 3I Atlas became one of the most mysterious parts of the study. Usually interstellar comets behave predictably. As they approach the sun, the surface heats up, the ice sublimates, a coma and a tail appear, and their intensity rises and falls according to distance. But with 3I Atlas everything was different. Real fact. The comet displayed uneven, jump-like gas emissions that did not correlate with surface temperature. Some of them were detected even when the object was too far from the sun for ice to melt actively. Interpretation of official models. Internal gas traps could suddenly rupture under their own pressure. But even this version does not explain all the details. Some researchers believe the emissions were not simply sudden. They seemed to occur with a certain rhythm. When astronomers overlaid the emission data on time diagrams, they noticed a strange coincidence. Roughly every 11 hours the intensity of gas flows changed sharply. It was not a precise periodicity, but the hint was noticeable enough to spark discussions. Online, a hypothesis spreads that such quasi-periodic activity may be connected with internal cavities or, as supporters of alternative theories claim, with the remnants of some processes that once operated inside the comet. Another fact turned out even stranger. Several gas clouds contained a non-standard ratio of nitrogen and carbon isotopes. Under natural conditions, such proportions are possible but rare. Interpretation. The comet might have formed in a region with more exotic chemistry. But according to certain indirect data, exactly such ratios sometimes appear in samples that undergo intense high-energy particle processing. At the same time, an unusual electromagnetic field was recorded above one of the telescopes monitoring the comet, a short local spike lasting less than a minute. Officially, it was called ionospheric noise, but several observatory employees anonymously confirmed that the event coincided with another sudden gas emission on 3I Atlas. A coincidence? Or a reaction to something we do not yet understand? Even more questions were raised by one incident that has never been explained. During infrared observations, part of the data suddenly disappeared. Instead of thermal flux graphs, the archive contained an empty file marked corrupted. No official source comments on this. But scientific circles whisper that at that moment the comet showed an atypical gas spectrum that did not match any known sublimation model. Access to this information was blocked within an hour. The behavior of emissions in the tail also looked suspicious. In several images from different observatories, the gas tail of 3I Atlas suddenly bent in a direction inconsistent with the solar wind. It was only a few frames, and it was quickly dismissed as a registration error, but the satellite archives soon replaced these photos with updated versions, without the anomaly. Some believe such a distorted tail could indicate interaction between the comet and an invisible field or a particle stream not included in the standard solar model. Others offer a more cautious interpretation, Perhaps a fragment or small cloud of material passed nearby, similar to those occasionally encountered in the interstellar medium. But there's also a more obscure version. Some experts hint that the jump-like emissions may have been the result of processes that are no longer active, but were once part of something larger, a mechanism, system, or structure that nature itself could hardly create. Were these emissions simply an exotic, but natural reaction of interstellar ice? Or a hint at a story we cannot yet piece together? There are many versions, and none of them has been disproven so far. One of the most confusing phenomena associated with 3I Atlas was its strange and unpredictable change in brightness. For comets, luminosity variation is normal. They brighten as they approach the sun and dim when they move away. But in the case of Atlas, the classic pattern did not work. The observed changes were not only unexpected, they often contradicted even the basic laws of photometry. The first sharp drop in brightness occurred a few months before the official confirmation of the comet's interstellar nature. Observers noticed that the object suddenly darkened by almost half within less than 40 minutes. For an ordinary comet, this would signal a breakup or a sharp drop in activity. But spectral data showed something else. The tail and coma did not change. In other words, the comet looked dimmer but was not less active. This meant that an external factor influenced its brightness. Later it turned out that such dips in brightness repeated several times. But even stranger was that mismatches appeared between automatic archives of different telescopes. In some images, Atlas appeared consistently bright, while in others, noticeably dimmer. Usually this is attributed to different observing conditions, but there was one important detail. All these telescopes observed the comet almost simultaneously. If the comet had truly dimmed, all would have seen it. But they did not. One of the most debated anomalies was recorded during a relatively calm phase of the comet. Then its brightness suddenly increased by 30%, not gradually, but in a jump, within 3 minutes. The flare looked as if something from outside illuminated the comet. The problem is that there was no object nearby capable of producing such an effect. Such flashes in astronomy almost never occur without a visible source. Official comments explain this as possible reflection effects, or small fragments temporarily reflecting sunlight. But in the observatory's working logs, there is a note about an unusual spectral shift recorded at roughly the same moment. The shift briefly expanded the comet's spectrum into a range usually seen in high-tension plasma structures. These data were not publicly commented on. Some believe they were simply hidden because they did not fit any standard model of cometary material behavior. Even more intriguing was the event researchers called a darkening without an occulting body. For 12 minutes, the comet dimmed as if some object passed in front of it and blocked the light. But no body, dust cloud, or fragment was detected. There were also no data on trajectory variations or gravitational effects. It looked as if 3I Atlas entered a zone that temporarily altered its visible brightness, or created something like an energy shell around itself. Some astronomers suggest the darkening could have resulted from an internal dark material ejection, extremely fine dust or particles invisible in ordinary spectra. But there is a nuance. This would require a colossal amount of such particles, and it would have appeared at least in the radio range. Yet this did not happen. More radical, but not less discussed. Interpretations speak of possible interaction between the comet and a field capable of absorbing or bending light. Officially, this version sounds too bold, so it is mentioned only informally. In the end, Atlas posed an uncomfortable question to the scientific community. Are we observing an unusual interstellar comet, or a phenomenon with no direct analogs in natural astrophysics? After a series of anomalous brightness changes in 3I Atlas, researchers began to notice another strange pattern. At moments when something unusual was happening with the comet, the instruments tracking it started to malfunction. At first this was dismissed as a coincidence, but eventually the number of such coincidences became too large to ignore. And although this was hardly discussed officially, the observatory's working logs contained entries hinting that the problem was far deeper and more mysterious. The first malfunctions were noticed in the radio range. Antennas that had worked flawlessly for years began producing signals with increased noise levels, as if someone covered them with an invisible noise blanket. And intriguingly, these distortions aligned in time with periods when 3I Atlas exhibited strange behavior. Reports mention it explicitly. A few minutes before the comet suddenly increased in brightness, radio telescopes lost the ability to record a stable signal. It created the impression that the comet was suppressing or blocking part of the frequencies. Some researchers believe this was the result of a stream of charged particles that could have leaked from the Atlas nucleus. In theory, such a phenomenon is possible, but it is usually accompanied by characteristic electromagnetic signatures. These, however, were absent. Instead, the failures resembled the influence of some structured field acting selectively, affecting certain frequencies while leaving others untouched. This led some astronomers to speculate that the comet might have been generating short-lived zones of electromagnetic interference around itself. Problems also began appearing in optical systems. Several cameras operating on different continents suddenly produced images with identical artifacts: horizontal stripes, brief exposure dropouts, distortions of light points. Usually such issues are individual hardware failures, but here everything looked synchronized. In some cases the camera's data were not saved at all, even though the recording systems reported no errors. In the reports this was described as a mismatch between timestamps and actual exposure. Simply put, the equipment functioned, but no result appeared. There is a theory that in these moments the comet might have emitted weak pulses, temporarily affecting electronics. A similar effect has been observed when spacecraft pass through dense plasma layers, but Atlas was nowhere near such regions. Astronomers officially do not comment on this anomaly, although several observatory staff anonymously stated that they had never seen such synchronized equipment failures. Even stranger were the events when the instruments worked too well. At certain moments the systems began recording data with anomalously high precision, higher than their design should allow. It appeared as if the comet itself was amplifying the signal or somehow organizing the surrounding space so that the optics saw it more clearly. This is one of the most controversial topics because it is not mentioned officially at all, but several scientists privately confirmed that such abnormally clean frames indeed existed. Another no less mysterious line of events was the disappearance of individual data sets. In several cases, information already saved on servers vanished without a trace or appeared corrupted. According to indirect reports, these missing fragments were precisely those that recorded the comet's unusual behavioral patterns. When journalists asked about this, official representatives responded vaguely, perhaps an archiving failure. But then why did only the anomaly-related data disappear? At the same time, speculation is spreading online that the equipment failures were not random, but indicated some property of 3I Atlas that remains unexplained. Some enthusiasts even hint at a possible artificial influence, though there is no evidence, only coincidences that seem a little too synchronized. Whether this is coincidence or a pattern is for you to decide. But one fact remains. At the moments when the comet behaved most strangely, the instruments fell silent. And to this day, no one can say for certain what that meant. Astronomers have long known that a comet's nucleus is its heart, the place where the most valuable information about the object's origin is stored. In the case of 3I Atlas, interest in the nucleus was especially high, since an interstellar body could contain materials not found in our solar system. Real data showed that its brightness was unstable, its size unclear, and its activity unpredictable. But behind these facts, assumptions gradually emerged, assumptions that official science preferred to avoid. Let's start with the fact that the nucleus of 3I Atlas still has not been determined precisely. Telescopes from different observatories provided estimates ranging from several hundred meters to almost 2 kilometers in diameter. This is a very wide range, and usually it can be explained by a complex shape or surface activity. But here the situation is different. Some researchers noted that the nucleus's brightness changed, as if its parts were turning on and off. It sounds strange, but that is exactly how the phenomenon was described in technical reports: localized areas with sharply increasing light output. Officially, the explanation is simple: powerful gas jets. However, some argue that such behavior looks more like controlled thermal emissions. Several engineer astrophysicists pointed out another fact. The light spectrum from the nucleus contained distinct hot lines, usually associated with rare compounds. They are not proof of anything unusual, but some researchers believe that part of these lines could indicate thermal processes not typical for natural objects. And where unusual processes appear, conspiracy-like interpretations follow. At certain moments, photographs of the comet showed something resembling geometric shadows, straight-line structures in the dust cloud. Of course, such effects may arise from reflections, pixel artifacts, or the orientation of gas jets. But online speculation suggests these shadows resemble segmented sections or even panels. Some believe these may be fragments of the nucleus's crust peeling away in even almost artificial layers. Official sources do not comment on this. There is also indirect evidence that the nucleus's temperature was abnormal. During periods when the comet was far from the sun, infrared instruments still detected localized heat flashes. This can be explained by chemical reactions in the ice, but several scientists hinted that such activity was too stable, as if maintained from within. One hypothesis: an internal cavity where gas accumulated under pressure. Another voiced much more cautiously the possibility that the nucleus has a structure capable of functioning as a thermal accumulator. There is no direct proof, so any discussion here remains speculation. Another mystery is the data that never appeared publicly. It is known that several high-sensitivity spectrograms of the nucleus were made, but the information was later removed. The official reason: the data require correction due to calibration errors. However, some laboratory staff anonymously confirmed that these spectrograms showed something very unusual. What exactly, they did not specify. Coincidence or not, access to these files was blocked just a few hours after they were created. Some experts in private conversations suggest that the nucleus may be hollow or have a complex multi-layer structure that resembles a construction rather than a chaotic chunk of ice. Bold as it sounds, all such claims rely only on indirect signs, nonlinear reflections, strange temperatures, and mysterious gaps in data. What is the nucleus of 3I Atlas hiding? A natural anomaly, a unique structure, or something we simply do not yet know how to explain? There are many versions, and none of them can be ruled out entirely. Everything may turn out to be simpler or far more complex.